I'm sitting in my office looking at the latest rankings, and honestly, I knew this call was coming. My phone's been blowing up all week about Paddy Pimblett getting the interim title shot. Everyone's got an opinion about our ranking system, about who deserves what, about fairness. But here's what they don't see: the decisions that keep this business alive. Rankings should matter. Best fighter should get the shot. This isn't fair. Fair. Let me tell you about fair. Fair is what got us nearly bankrupted twice in the early 2000s when we were trying to run this like amateur wrestling instead of professional entertainment. The Arman Tsarukyan situation? Yeah, I heard what he said. UFC promotes certain fighters over others. Look, Arman's a hell of a fighter. He beat Dan Hooker clean, dominated on the ground, showed incredible heart. He's been putting in work, taking tough fights, never complained. In a perfect world based purely on merit, maybe he'd be fighting for the title next. But this isn't a perfect world. There's more to this game than just winning fights. Even in the early UFC days, the fighters who captured imagination were the ones who got big opportunities. Royce Gracie wasn't the biggest or strongest, but he had a story. Ken Shamrock wasn't just a great fighter. He was a character that sold tickets. People think I wake up every morning trying to screw over the hardest workers. That's not how this works. I've lost more sleep over talented fighters who couldn't draw flies to shit than anything else in this business. I've seen fighters who deserve everything and get nothing. Matt Hughes was one of the most dominant champions we ever had, but he fought when pay-per-view numbers were a fraction of today's. I've also seen fighters who get opportunities that change their lives forever. The difference is understanding what drives this machine. When we first started building the UFC, we learned something fast. Skill alone doesn't sell fights. I wish it did. It would make my job easier. But fans connect with personalities, with stories, with fighters they love or hate. That's human nature. I remember meetings in 2005, looking at projections showing we were hemorrhaging money despite excellent fights. Frank Mir, Tim Sylvia, and Andre Arlovski were putting on clinics, but pay-per-view numbers were brutal. Then Tito Ortiz would talk trash, and suddenly people cared about his next fight. Take Demetrius Johnson. Pound for pound, one of the greatest fighters who ever lived. Incredible skills, incredible work ethic. The guy was a surgeon in there, dismantling world-class opponents with speed, technique, and fight IQ that was off the charts. But his pay-per-views couldn't crack 200,000 buys. We put him on free TV more than any champion in history because we couldn't sell his fights on pay-per-view. Meanwhile, Conor McGregor breaks every record we have. UFC 229 did 2.4 million buys. Why? Because Conor understood this is entertainment as much as sport. I remember when we traded DJ to one championship for Ben Askren. People lost their minds. But DJ wanted to be paid like a superstar while fighting in a division where our biggest gate was maybe $2 million. Ben had never fought in the UFC, but had built name recognition that DJ, despite being infinitely more accomplished, never achieved. That doesn't mean I don't respect pure competitors, but I have responsibility to hundreds of employees, to shareholders, to fighters themselves. If this company goes under, nobody makes money. We tried pure meritocracy in the early days. Fight bonuses went to the most technical performances. Title shots went strictly by rankings. And we nearly went bankrupt twice. I still have nightmares about board meetings in 2004 to 2005. The Fertittas had invested $40 million, and we were burning through it. I remember calculating which bills we could pay and which we'd have to delay. The sport was technically excellent, but nobody was watching. Fighters made $3,000 to show because there was no money coming in. Then along comes Chuck Liddell, and everything changed. Chuck wasn't the most technical fighter, but he had timing, power, and charisma that made people want to watch him fight. He looked like a rock star, carried himself like a badass, and when he knocked people out, it looked effortless. When Chuck started selling pay-per-views, suddenly we could afford to pay all fighters more, invest in better production, expand internationally. That's when I realized the popularity isn't separate from the sport. It is the sport. Being able to sell fights is a skill just as important as good takedown defense. Look at what happened with the lightweight division. We had killers like Tony Ferguson putting together incredible win streaks. We had Donald Cerrone taking any fight, anywhere. But when Conor McGregor showed up talking, everything changed. Not because he was necessarily better, but because he understood the total package this business demands. I remember seeing Conor at a Dublin event before he joined UFC. The crowd reaction was unlike anything I'd seen from a regional fighter. People were treating him like a superstar before he'd accomplished anything significant. That's when I knew he had something special. The night Conor knocked out Jose Aldo, that wasn't just about fighting skills. That was about 2 years of build-up, mind games, Conor systematically breaking down a dominant champion. When it happened in 13 seconds, it wasn't just a knockout. It was completing a story millions had invested in emotionally. The pay-per-view did 1.2 million buys. Jose's previous defenses were doing maybe 300,000. Same fighter, same skills, but different presentation, different narrative. That's the difference between technical competition and cultural event. That's what guys like Arman don't always understand, and I'm not trying to criticize him personally. I want Arman to succeed. I want every fighter on our roster to make life-changing money and become household names. But success in this business means more than just winning fights against the guys they put in front of you. It means making people care about your fights before they happen and remember them long after they're over. That's what guys like Arman don't always understand. I'm not trying to hold him back. I want him to succeed. But success in this business means more than just winning fights. It means making people care about your fights. When Paddy Pimblett steps in there with Justin Gaethje, it's not just about their records, though both guys have earned their spots through years of fighting. It's about the fact that Paddy has built something authentic with the fans that you can't fake or manufacture. They're invested in his story, in his journey from a regional fighter in Liverpool to potentially becoming a world champion in the biggest organization in mixed martial arts. I watch Paddy's entrances, and there's something special happening. 20,000 people are on their feet before he throws a punch, singing along to his walkout music, genuinely excited to see what he's going to do. That's not marketing. That's not promotion. That's organic fan connection, and it's worth its weight in gold in this business. You can't buy that kind of enthusiasm. You can't script that kind of genuine emotion. The critics say that's not fair to the guys who just put their heads down, train twice a day, and grind out victories without the flashy entrances or the social media following. I understand that criticism, I really do. But here's the reality. Life isn't fair. And fighting sure as hell isn't fair. If it was just about who deserved what based on merit alone, we'd still be running shows in high school gyms for crowds of 500 people, paying fighters in pizza and gas money. I think about all the fighters who came before the UFC was successful. Guys who were just as skilled as today's champions, but made $500 a fight because nobody knew who they were. They deserved better, but deserving something and getting something are different things. The modern UFC fighter has opportunities those pioneers never had. Social media, podcasts, sponsorship deals, dozens of ways to build your brand outside the cage. But some guys choose not to use those tools, then complain when others get ahead. That doesn't mean fighting ability doesn't matter. The best fighters still rise to the top eventually, because you can't fake what happens when that cage door closes. But the path isn't always a straight line. Sometimes a fighter needs a bigger stage or higher profile opponent to prove they belong. Khabib Nurmagomedov understood this balance perfectly, probably better than any fighter I've ever worked with. He wasn't just a great fighter, though he was obviously one of the most dominant grapplers in the history of the sport. He was a character, a personality that people connected with on multiple levels. He had catchphrases that became part of MMA culture. He had that Russian mystique, that Dagestani warrior background that gave him an authenticity you can't manufacture. He had the whole ego persona that made him larger than life while still being completely genuine. But more than any of that, Khabib understood how to build a story around his fights. The way he talked about his opponents wasn't just trash talk. It was psychological warfare combined with entertainment. When he called Conor a tap machine or told him, "I'm gonna smash your boy," it wasn't just for show. He was breaking his opponents down mentally, while simultaneously building anticipation for the fight among fans who wanted to see if he could back up his words. When Khabib fought Conor at UFC 229, that wasn't just a title fight between two incredibly skilled lightweights. That was the culmination of everything I've been talking about: elite-level skill combined with compelling personalities, genuine bad blood that had been building for over a year, cultural and religious undertones that made it bigger than sports, and a narrative that had people all over the world emotionally invested in the outcome. The build-up to that fight was unlike anything I'd experienced. We had the bus attack in Brooklyn, press conferences that turned into confrontations. The whole thing was a powder keg. I remember the night before UFC 229, trying to anticipate every scenario. Security meetings lasted hours. The Nevada Athletic Commission was breathing down our necks. Everyone could feel something deeper than normal pre-fight nerves. And look what happened. The biggest pay-per-view in UFC history. 2.4 million buys. Both guys made more money than they'd ever seen. Khabib dominated, proved he was better, settled the score. But after Khabib won, when his team jumped into the crowd and security lost control, that's when I realized how much pressure this system puts on everyone. The build-up was so intense, so personal, it couldn't just end with a handshake. There was too much real emotion built up from months of promotion. Standing in that octagon after UFC 229, with broken glass scattered around the arena, security trying to separate about 50 people, blood on the canvas, and fans throwing bottles at anyone in a suit, I had to ask myself a question that keeps me awake some nights. Is this worth it? Are the big pay-per-view numbers and the mainstream attention and the financial success worth nights like this when the whole thing spirals out of control? But then I step back and look at where we are now. The UFC is a global brand that's broadcast in over 175 countries. Our fighters are household names who get recognized on the street in countries where mixed martial arts didn't even exist 20 years ago. We've got deals with ESPN, with international broadcasters, with streaming platforms that put our content in front of hundreds of millions of people. The average UFC fighter makes more money than athletes in most other individual sports, including baseball and hockey players who never make it past the minor leagues. And that happened because we figured out how to make people care about fights emotionally, not just appreciate them technically. We learned how to tell stories that make casual fans as invested as hardcore fight fans. We developed a formula that respects the sport while acknowledging that professional sports has always been entertainment, going back to the gladiators in Rome and the prize fighters of the 1800s. The ranking system will always be imperfect because it's trying to measure something that can't really be measured mathematically. How do you compare a guy who's won 8 fights against solid but not elite competition to a guy who's won 5 fights, but they were all spectacular finishes against former champions? How do you weigh a fighter's ability to sell pay-per-views against his win streak when both of those things directly impact how much money he can make for himself and his family? How do you factor in injuries that derail momentum, contract negotiations that delay fights, personal issues that affect preparation, and all the other variables that go into actually making these fights happen in the real world? People want simple answers to complicated questions, especially on social media where every opinion can be condensed into a tweet. They want me to just look at who's ranked #1 contender and book that fight next, regardless of any other factors. But if I did that exclusively, we'd miss opportunities for fights that capture the public imagination and create those career-defining moments that fighters remember for the rest of their lives. We'd miss chances to build stars who can headline pay-per-views and sell out arenas in multiple countries. More importantly, we'd miss opportunities for fighters to prove themselves on the biggest possible stages. Sometimes the guy ranked #4 is actually better than the guy ranked #2, but he needs the right platform to show it. Sometimes a fighter needs to face a specific style of opponent to display their full skill set. Sometimes timing and momentum matter more than strict adherence to rankings that were compiled by media members who may or may not understand the nuances of different fighting styles. The truth is, most fighters understand this business reality better than the fans do, especially the fighters who've been around long enough to see how careers develop over time. They know that winning fights is just part of the equation, and often not even the biggest part. The smart ones work on their mic skills. They engage with media in meaningful ways. They build genuine relationships with fans through social media and public appearances. They understand that in the fight business, being marketable is just as much a professional skill as having good footwork or sharp boxing combinations. When I see a young fighter come in and just want to fight whoever's next in line according to some arbitrary ranking system, I try to explain this reality to them. I'm not trying to make it harder for them or hold them back from opportunities. I'm trying to give them the tools and understanding they need to make the most of their careers, both financially and in terms of legacy. Because even if they're the most technically gifted fighter in the world, If nobody knows who they are outside of hardcore MMA circles, they're going to make a fraction of what they could make with the right approach to building their brand. That doesn't mean we ignore merit entirely, or that we're running some kind of popularity contest where fighting ability doesn't matter. The best fighters still rise to the top eventually, because you can't fake what happens when two elite athletes are locked in a cage together for 25 minutes. But the path to the top isn't always a straight line from wins and losses to title shots, and it shouldn't be. Professional sports has never worked that way, and professional prize fighting definitely doesn't work that way. Sometimes a fighter needs a bigger platform to show what they can do against elite-level competition. Sometimes they need to face a higher-profile opponent to prove they belong in championship conversations. Sometimes they need time to develop their whole professional game, not just their fighting skills, but their media skills, their ability to handle the pressure that comes with being a public figure, their understanding of what it takes to be a champion in all aspects of the job. The Paddy Pimblett situation is a perfect example of this complex reality. Is he the most deserving lightweight based purely on wins, losses, and strength of schedule? Probably not, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend otherwise. But he's captured something authentic with the fans that you can't teach in any gym and you can't fake with any amount of promotion or marketing. When he fights, people watch. When he talks, people listen. When he walks to the cage, arenas full of people who paid their hard-earned money to be there go absolutely crazy with excitement. In this business, that matters. It matters for Paddy's bank account. It matters for the UFC's bottom line. It matters for the sport's continued growth into mainstream acceptance. And it matters for every other fighter on the roster who benefits from being part of an organization that can afford to pay competitive salaries and provide world-class facilities and support. And here's the thing that critics don't want to acknowledge because it complicates their narrative. Usually the most popular fighters are also really damn good fighters. They have to be, because modern MMA fans are sophisticated. They've seen thousands of fights. They understand technique. They can spot pretenders pretty quickly. Conor didn't just talk his way to titles. He knocked out Jose Aldo and Eddie Alvarez, both elite champions in their primes. Khabib wasn't just charismatic. He dominated every single opponent he ever fought in the UFC. Chuck Liddell wasn't just a personality. He had some of the most devastating knockout power the sport has ever seen. The narrative that we're choosing popularity over skill, or that we're somehow rigging the system against pure competitors, is mostly bullshit created by people who don't understand how professional sports businesses actually operate. What we're really doing is choosing fighters who have the complete package. Elite fighting ability combined with the kind of personality and presentation skills that can reach audiences beyond just hardcore fight fans. Because in today's entertainment market, with so many options competing for people's attention and disposable income, you need both elements to be truly successful. The days of the quiet, workmanlike champion who just shows up, wins fights, and goes home without engaging with media or fans are mostly over. The spotlight is too bright. The media demands are too extensive. The competition for attention from other sports and entertainment options is too fierce. I know this frustrates some people who prefer their sports pure and simple. They want fights to be determined purely by who's the best athlete, with no consideration for entertainment value or commercial appeal. I get that sentiment, I really do. There's something appealing about the idea of pure competition where only results matter. But purity doesn't pay fighters' salaries. It doesn't fill 20,000-seat arenas. It doesn't create the kind of mainstream opportunities that let fighters take care of their families for generations. So when Arman Tsarukyan says we promote certain fighters over others, he's absolutely right. We do. But not because we're playing favorites based on personal relationships, or because we don't respect hard work and dedication, or because we're trying to turn mixed martial arts into professional wrestling. We do it because that's how you build a business that can support hundreds of professional fighters instead of dozens, that can expand globally instead of staying regional, that can provide opportunities for life-changing money instead of just covering basic training expenses. The ranking system is a tool, not a Bible. It gives us a useful framework for evaluating fighters and making decisions about matchups, but it can't account for everything that makes a fight compelling or a fighter marketable. If we followed it religiously without considering any other factors, We'd miss out on the magic that happens when the right fighters meet at the right time under the right circumstances with the right amount of anticipation and emotional investment from fans. Look, I understand the frustration that comes from fighters who feel like they're being overlooked despite impressive records and consistent performances. If I was in Arman Tsarukyan's position, having beaten Dan Hooker convincingly and build a solid win streak in one of the toughest divisions in the sport, I'd probably be pissed too. I'd probably be wondering why I'm not getting the opportunities that seem to go to fighters with more social media followers or more colorful personalities. But the answer isn't to tear down the entire system or pretend that commercial considerations don't matter in professional sports. The answer is to figure out how to work within the reality of how this business operates in 2026. Build your brand alongside your fight record. Connect with fans in authentic ways. Give us reasons to put you in big fights that go beyond just your position in some arbitrary ranking system compiled by journalists. Because at the end of the day, this is still fundamentally a meritocracy. The cream still rises to the top. Elite fighters find ways to get elite opportunities. But merit in the fight business includes more than just fighting ability and win-loss records. It includes the ability to sell fights, to handle the intense pressure that comes with championship-level competition, to perform when the lights are brightest and millions of people are watching and judging every move you make. The fighters who understand that complete package are the ones who end up with the biggest opportunities and the most lucrative careers. The ones who don't, who think that fighting ability alone should be enough, are the ones who end up frustrated with a system they see as unfair. But the system isn't unfair. It's just more complex and multifaceted than they want to acknowledge. As I sit here looking at these rankings, knowing there's going to be more controversy no matter what fights we announce next, I'm comfortable with our decisions. Are they perfect? No. Will everyone agree? Definitely not. But they're right for the business, for the sport, and ultimately for the fighters themselves. The conversation about rankings and fairness will continue, and it should. But at some point, you have to make the fights and let results speak for themselves. When Paddy steps into that octagon with Gaethje, we'll find out if all that popularity translates into elite performance. If he wins, he'll have proven he belongs regardless of how he got there. If not, the rankings will sort themselves out quickly. That's the beauty of this sport. You can talk all you want, build all the hype, but eventually you have to fight. When that happens, the truth comes out. Performance matters more than promotion. So we'll keep making fights that make sense from every angle. Competition, commerce, storylines, timing, and yes, rankings too. The fighters who don't like it, they know what to do. Win fights spectacularly. Build their brand. Connect with fans. Give us no choice but to put them in the biggest fights available. Because that's still how you get to the top. That's how you become undeniable. That's how you go from complaining about the system to benefiting from it. The ranking system will never be perfect. The criticism will never stop. But the fights will keep happening. The sport will keep growing. And the best fighters will keep rising to the top, just like they always have.